widow accepted a crooked house as payment, but what she found beneath it, Margaret Louise never imagined she would accept a tilted house as a solution to her problems. A widow for 3 years, she cared for 6 orphaned children that her late husband had taken in over the years, and the debts were piling up faster than her ability to pay them. That's when Mr. Harold Patterson knocked on the door of her small rented house in Clear Springs, in the countryside of West Virginia, with a proposal she never expected to hear. "Mrs. Margaret, I came to talk about the debt I had with your Thomas," said the merchant, adjusting his sweaty hat. $3,000 is not a small amount, and I know you're going through hard times." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and invited him in. The children were playing in the yard, their cheerful voices contrasting with the tension that filled the air whenever money was the topic. "Mr. Harold, you know I can't pay this amount all at once. Since my Thomas passed away, I haven't been able to keep the workshop running." "That's exactly why I came here," he replied, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket. "I have a rural property that I no longer need. It's yours if you settle the debt." Margaret looked at the paper with suspicion. She had known Harold for years and knew he didn't do business without making a profit. "What kind of property?" "A house with good land, wooded. It's about 20 kilometers from here on the road to Pretty Rock." "And why do you want to get rid of it like this?" Harold hesitated for a moment, nervously fidgeting with his hat. "The truth is, the house has some minor structural issues. Nothing that can't be fixed with a little effort." Margaret felt a tightness in her chest. When someone like Harold talked about minor issues, it usually meant something serious. "Can I see the property before deciding?" Of course, but the offer is only until tomorrow. I have another interested party." All this rush made Margaret even more suspicious, but her situation was desperate. The landlord of the house they lived in had raised the rent and given her 30 days to decide, either pay the new amount or leave. With 6 children to raise, she didn't have many options. The next morning, Margaret borrowed the neighbor's truck and took the 3 oldest children to see the property. Daniel, 12 years old, was the most questioning of the group. Emily, 10, always looked for the bright side of situations. And Charlie, 9, had the gift of making everyone laugh, even in difficult times. The dirt road wound through eucalyptus trees and the typical brushland of the region. As they approached the location indicated by Harold, Margaret noticed that the vegetation became denser and the path narrower. "Look there, Aunt Margaret," shouted Emily, pointing to a clearing ahead. Margaret stepped on the brake and remained silent for a few seconds, trying to process what she saw. Before her was a wooden house with a thatched roof, surrounded by ancient trees, but there was something profoundly wrong with the structure. "Oh my goodness," murmured Daniel. "The house is falling over." And it really was. The small building leaned to one side so noticeably that it seemed it would collapse at any moment. Several makeshift wooden stakes supported the side that threatened to give way. "This can't be happening," Margaret whispered, feeling tears form in her eyes. "Aunt, we can fix it," said Emily, always optimistic. "Dad always said there's no problem without a solution." Margaret got out of the truck with trembling legs. The children followed her, curious and a little scared. As they approached the house, they could see that the tilt was even more severe than it seemed from afar. "Look at this," said Daniel, walking around the building. "It seems like this whole side sank into the ground." Margaret examined the foundation and noticed that some of the stone supports holding up the house had given way or simply disappeared. It was as if someone had intentionally removed the supports from one side. "This was done on purpose," she murmured, more to herself than to the children. "What did you say, Aunt?" asked Charlie. "Nothing important, my dear. Let's see what's inside." The front door was so misaligned that Margaret had to push hard to open it. Inside, the slanted floor made it difficult to walk normally. All the furniture that had been left behind was piled up against the lower wall. "It's like a slide in here," joked Charlie, sliding down the slanted floor to the back wall. Emily and Daniel laughed, but Margaret couldn't find the situation amusing. How could she raise 6 children in a place like this? It was practically uninhabitable. Outside, she sat on a fallen log and put her head in her hands. The children approached, concerned. "Aunt Margaret, don't be sad," said Emily, wrapping her small arm around the woman's shoulders. We always figure something out. You don't understand, my dears. We have nowhere to go. If I don't accept this house, we'll have to be separated. Separated how? Asked Daniel, his voice tense. Margaret took a deep breath before answering. She had promised herself she would always be honest with the children, even when the truth hurt. The money we have is barely enough for food. I can't afford higher rent. If we don't have a place to live, you'll have to go to different homes, with families who can take care of you. The silence that followed was broken only by the singing of birds in the surrounding trees. Margaret saw tears forming in the children's eyes, and her heart broke a little more. Then let's fix this house, said Daniel, with a determination that surprised Margaret. It can't be that hard. Daniel, sweetheart, it's not that simple. Why not, Aunt? Emily joined her older brother. We'll work together like we always have. Dad taught us that when the family comes together, there's no obstacle we can't overcome. Margaret looked at the children's determined faces and felt something stir in her chest. Maybe it was crazy, but they were right about one thing. They had nothing to lose by trying. All right, she said, standing up and wiping away her tears. Let's go back home and get the others. If we're going to live here, let it be with everyone together. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The way back to Clear Springs was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Margaret tried to come up with a mental plan for how she could make that house livable, while the children imagined what it would be like to live in a crooked house. Arriving home, she gathered everyone in the small living room. Besides Daniel, Emily, and Charlie, there was 7-year-old Timmy, the 5-year-old twins Sarah and Hannah, and little Jacob, who was only 3. Children, I need to talk to you about our future, Margaret began, sitting on the floor to be at the same level as the younger ones. Jacob climbed onto her lap, as he always did when he sensed something important was happening. The twins positioned themselves on either side, while Timmy sat cross-legged, his eyes wide with curiosity. You know our situation here isn't easy. Money is tight and the rent has gone up. Are we going to have to leave, Aunt Margaret? Asked Sarah, the shyer of the twins. Yes, sweetheart, but we found a place we can go. It's a house in the middle of the woods, with plenty of space for you to play. There's something wrong with the house, isn't there? Timmy was surprisingly perceptive for his age. Margaret sighed. It was no use trying to fool the children. They always found out the truth anyway. Yes, there is, Timmy. The house is a bit crooked. It's going to take a lot of work to fix it. Crooked how? Asked Hannah. Daniel stepped forward and explained to his younger siblings what they had seen. As he described the leaning house, Margaret watched the children's reactions. To her surprise, none of them seemed scared or discouraged. So it's like a boat? Asked Jacob, his eyes shining. It's kind of like that, yes, replied Emily, laughing. That's so cool. I've never lived on a boat, said the boy, clapping his little hands. Margaret couldn't help but smile at the children's innocence and optimism. They turned any situation into an adventure. But it's going to be hard, everyone. We're going to have to work really hard to make the house livable. We're not afraid of work, said Timmy, puffing out his chest. We're the Thompson family. The others agreed enthusiastically, and Margaret felt a wave of pride and emotion. Her late husband had truly raised a close-knit and determined family. All right, then. Tomorrow morning we'll go get our things and move. But I want everyone to understand, it's not going to be easy. We're going to spend a few days, maybe weeks, living in difficult conditions. It can't be worse than being separated, murmured Emily, and everyone agreed. That night, Margaret could barely sleep. She turned over all the practical details of the move and the necessary repairs in her head. How would she manage to straighten an entire house? Where would she get money for materials? What if the structure was damaged beyond repair? Her worries were interrupted by small footsteps in the hallway. Sarah appeared in the bedroom door carrying her rag doll. Aunt Margaret, I can't sleep. Come here, my dear. The girl slipped under the covers next to Margaret, who hugged her tenderly. Are you scared of the new house? A little, but more scared of us being separated. Margaret held the girl tightly against her chest, feeling her heart clench. That's not going to happen, Sarah, I promise you. We will all stay together no matter what. Even if the house falls down. Even if the house falls down. We'll find a way to fix it." Sarah snuggled in closer and was asleep within minutes. Margaret lay looking at the girl's serene little face, mentally renewing her determination. She would do anything to keep this family together. The next morning, they woke up early to organize the move. Margaret had borrowed an old pickup truck from Mr. Walter, who lived next door and was always willing to help. "Mrs. Margaret, are you sure you want to go to that place?" asked Walter, concerned, as they loaded the few pieces of furniture. "I've heard that house is in terrible condition." "We have no choice, Mr. Walter. It's what we could get. If you need anything, just send one of the boys to get me. I don't live far." Margaret thanked her neighbor for his kindness, knowing she would probably need his help soon. The trip to the new house was lively. The children sang songs that Thomas used to teach them and made wild plans about what their new life in the middle of nature would be like. "I'm going to build a tree house," declared Daniel. "And I'm going to plant flowers everywhere," said Emily. "I'm going to teach the birds to talk," announced Charlie, always creative. Arriving at the property, however, the general mood dampened a little. In the daylight, the house looked even more precarious than Margaret remembered. Several boards on the side were loose, the roof had visible leaks, and the whole structure groaned in the wind. "Wow," murmured Timmy. "It really is crooked." The twins clung to Margaret's skirts, a little intimidated. Jacob, however, ran towards the house as if it were the most fun playground in the world. "Be careful, Jacob," shouted Margaret, running after him. The boy had started climbing the slanted wall as if it were a slide, laughing loudly. Daniel reached him first and held him before he could get hurt. "Jacob, this house isn't for playing. It's dangerous," Mrs. Margaret gently scolded him. "But it's fun, Auntie." "Maybe so, but first we need to make it safe. Only then can we play." They spent the first hour unloading their few belongings and exploring the property. The land was truly beautiful, with leafy trees, a small creek at the back, and plenty of space for the children to run around. "At least the place itself is nice," commented Emily, always looking for the positive side. "That's true," agreed Margaret. "If we can fix the house, it could be a wonderful place for you to grow up." But reality set in when they tried to organize a sleeping area. The slanted floor made it impossible to place the mattresses level. Everything slid toward the lower side of the house. "We'll have to improvise," said Margaret, trying to keep optimism in her voice. They used rocks and pieces of wood to create small steps in the floor, attempting to level the mattresses. It wasn't perfect, but at least they managed to create little corners where each child could lie down without rolling downhill. During the first night in the crooked house, Margaret stayed awake, listening to the strange sounds the structure made. Wood creaked, nails groaned, and she had a constant feeling that everything could collapse at any moment. But more disturbing than the noises was the growing certainty that this slope hadn't been caused by natural deterioration. The more she observed, the more convinced she became that someone had deliberately sabotaged the house's foundations. The next morning, while the children explored the surroundings, Margaret decided to examine the building's foundation more closely. What she found confirmed her suspicions. Several of the stones that were supposed to support the side of the house had been recently removed. The soil around showed clear signs of digging, and some of the wooden supports had fresh saw marks. "Someone did this on purpose," she murmured, feeling a mix of anger and determination growing in her chest. "Did what, Aunt Margaret?" Daniel had approached without her noticing. Margaret hesitated. Should she involve the children in this discovery? On the other hand, they had the right to know the truth about their new home. "Come here, Daniel. I want to show you something." She explained to the boy what she had discovered, showing him the evidence of sabotage. Daniel, being mature for his age, immediately understood the implications. "Did Mr. Harold know about this when he offered the house to you?" "I'm almost certain he did. In fact, I'm starting to suspect he ordered it done himself." "But why?" Margaret sighed, organizing her thoughts before answering. "I'm not sure, son, but men like Harold never do anything without a reason. If he wanted to get rid of this property quickly, it's because there's something here he doesn't want us to discover, or something he wants us to find," suggested Daniel, surprising Margaret with his insight. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, Auntie, but if he knew the house was sabotaged and still offered it to you, maybe he wants us to live here for some specific reason." Margaret was impressed by the boy's reasoning. He was right. Harold might be trying to use them in some way. You're very smart, Daniel, but that doesn't change the fact that we need a place to live. And for now, this is the only one we have. Then let's fix this house quickly. And who knows, in the process we might discover what this man really wants. The determination in the boy's voice was contagious. He was right. The best way to handle the situation was to move forward with repairing the house, keeping their eyes open for any clues about Harold's true intentions. They spent the rest of the morning studying the damaged structure and trying to come up with a plan of action. Emily joined the conversation when she realized something important was being discussed. "The first thing we need to do is lift this side of the house," said Daniel, pointing to the sunken side. "How are we going to do that?" asked Emily. "With levers," replied Margaret. "Your father used to say that with a big enough lever, a man can move mountains." "But we're not men," observed Emily. "No, but we're 7 people working together, and that's worth much more than one man alone." The children smiled, excited by the prospect of having a clear mission. Margaret, in turn, began making a mental list of everything they would need: wood for levers, ropes, stones for wedges, and above all, lots of patience. "First, we'll have to dig around the foundation to understand exactly what happened," explained Margaret. "Then, we find a way to lift the house and put the supports back in the right place." "What if we can't?" asked Emily, always practical. Margaret looked at the tilted house, then at the hopeful faces of the children, and felt a fierce determination take over her heart. "We will manage, dear. We have no choice." And they began to work. Margaret grabbed an old hoe she had found in a small shed at the back of the property, while the children used pieces of wood and even their hands to dig around the base of the house. It was hard and slow work, especially with the strong sun that began to beat down as the morning progressed. The younger children soon got tired and went to play in the shade of the trees, but the older ones persisted. It was Charlie who made the first interesting discovery. "Aunt Margaret, there's something strange here." Margaret dropped the hoe and ran to where the boy was digging. There, buried in the soft earth, was a small metal box about the size of a cookie tin. "What could this be?" asked Emily, approaching curiously. "There's only one way to find out," replied Margaret, picking up the box and shaking off the dirt covering it. The box was rusty but not completely deteriorated. It had a small lock that was already corroded enough to be easily broken. "Open it, Aunt," begged Daniel, barely containing his curiosity. Margaret used a stone to break the lock and carefully opened the box. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, was a paper yellowed with time. "A letter," she murmured, carefully unfolding the document. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written by an elderly person, but still legible. "To whoever finds this letter, my name is Walter Henderson, and this was my home for 43 years. If you are reading this, it means someone managed to buy or take possession of my property. I hope you are a good person, because I have an important story to tell. When I learned that my health was worsening and that I didn't have much time left to live, I decided to hide the savings of a lifetime here on the property. I don't trust banks, and my only relatives are greedy people who are just waiting for my departure to fight over the inheritance. The money is buried in a safe location on the property, but it can only be found when the house is perfectly level. I used the tilt as protection. While the house is crooked, the treasure remains hidden. If you are willing to fix this house and give it the care it deserves, then you also deserve what I've kept here. It's $15,000 in cash, enough to renovate everything and still have some left for a decent life. May God bless whoever takes care of my home. Walter Henderson, December 1998. Margaret finished reading the letter in silence, her hands trembling. The children watched her anxiously. "What does it say, Aunt Margaret?" asked Emily. Margaret looked at the expectant faces around her and felt her heart race. $15,000. It was far more money than she could ever dream of. With that amount, they could not only completely renovate the house, but also have financial security for a good while. "It says there's a treasure buried here," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "A real treasure," exclaimed Charlie, his eyes wide. "A real one. But we can only find it after we straighten the house." "So that's why someone made it crooked," exclaimed Daniel. "So no one could find the treasure." Margaret nodded, the puzzle pieces finally fitting together in her mind. Harold knew about the hidden money. That's why he had sabotaged the house, to discourage other interested parties, while he himself couldn't find the treasure because he didn't have the letter with the instructions. "But if he knew about the money, why did he give us the house?" asked Emily. "Because he couldn't find it on his own," answered Margaret. "And now he's betting that we'll do the hard work for him. He's probably hoping we'll give up and abandon the property, or that he'll find an excuse to take the house back after we straighten it." "That's not going to happen," declared Daniel with determination. "This house is ours now, and the treasure too." Margaret smiled at the boy, admiring his courage, but inside she felt growing concern. If her suspicions were correct, Harold wouldn't give up easily, and that could put the whole family in danger. "Listen carefully, children," she said, adopting a serious tone. "We can't tell anyone about this letter or about the treasure. If Harold finds out, he might try to harm us." "Harm us how?" asked Emily, with a hint of fear in her voice. "I'm not sure, dear. But greedy men are capable of anything. Let's keep this secret among ourselves and work to straighten the house as quickly as possible." The children solemnly agreed, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Margaret carefully put away the letter, and they returned to work with renewed energy. Now, however, every swing of the hoe had a much clearer purpose. They weren't just trying to get a place to live, they were fighting for their financial independence and the future of the whole family. The work continued for the rest of the day. As they dug around the foundation, they discovered more evidence of the sabotage. Several support stones had been recently removed, and some wooden beams had precise cuts that clearly weren't the result of natural deterioration. "This Harold is smarter than we thought," commented Margaret, examining one of the cuts. "He sabotaged the house to look like natural wear." "But not smart enough to find the treasure on his own," replied Daniel, with a hint of satisfaction in his voice. When the sun began to set, they stopped for a simple snack and assessed the day's progress. They had dug almost all around the house and identified exactly which supports needed to be put back in place. "Tomorrow we'll start straightening it for real," announced Margaret. "How are we going to do that, Aunt?" asked Timmy, who had joined the work group in the afternoon. "With ropes and levers. We'll lift it little by little until we can put the support stones back in the right place." "What if the house breaks?" "It won't break," answered Margaret with more conviction than she actually felt. "This house was built to last. We just need to treat it with care and patience." That second night in the crooked house, Margaret stayed awake even longer. The discovery of the letter had changed everything. Now it wasn't just about having a roof over their heads. It was about achieving true stability for her and the children, but it also meant they had a much more dangerous opponent than they imagined. Harold wasn't just a greedy merchant. He was someone willing to sabotage and manipulate to get what he wanted. Margaret left the house quietly and sat on the front steps, looking at the stars shining brightly in the pollution-free sky of the countryside. Wherever he was, her Thomas would certainly approve of the fight she was waging to keep the family together. "You always said what doesn't kill us makes us stronger," she murmured to the night wind. "I hope you're right, my love." A strange noise made her alert. It sounded like footsteps in the woods surrounding the property. Margaret stood still, trying to identify the source of the sound, but after a few minutes of silence she concluded it must have been some wild animal. Even so, she slept even more restlessly than the previous night. The morning of the third day brought an unpleasant surprise. Margaret woke up and discovered that several of the tools they had left outside the house had simply disappeared overnight. "It can't be," she murmured, looking for the hoe and shovels she had certainly left leaning against the house wall. "Aunt Margaret, where are the tools?" asked Daniel, approaching with a sleepy face. "They're gone, all of them." "Gone how?" "Someone took them during the night." Daniel remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. "It was Harold, wasn't it?" Margaret sighed. The boy was too perceptive for his age. "Probably. Or someone on his orders." "But why would he do that? Doesn't he get what he wants if we give up?" "That's exactly it, Daniel. He wants us to give up and leave. That way he can come back here and search for the treasure at his leisure. So he knows about the money. He must know. The question is, how did he find out?" They kept talking as the other children woke up and became aware of the tool's disappearance. The general reaction was indignation. "That's not fair," declared Emily. How are we going to work without tools? We'll manage, replied Margaret with determination. Men like Harold think taking our tools is enough to make us surrender, but they forget that determined people always find a way. And they did indeed. Margaret remembered she had seen some rusty tools in the small shed out back. They weren't in good condition, but they were still useful. Besides, they improvised other tools using pieces of wood and stones. "Look at this," said Charlie, brandishing a wooden stick he had sharpened with a stone. "It's almost like a hoe." The children's creativity in improvising tools impressed Margaret. In no time, they had an improvised but functional arsenal. The day's work focused on preparing the levers they would use to lift the house. Margaret remembered the physics lessons she had learned in school decades ago. With a proper fulcrum and a long enough lever, it would be possible to lift considerable weight. "The problem," she explained to the children, "is that we need to lift the entire house at once, not just one part." "Why don't we make several levers?" suggested Emily. "That's a good idea. If we place 3 or 4 levers at different points, we can lift the entire side together." They spent the day looking for long, sturdy logs that could serve as levers. They found some fallen eucalyptus trees in the woods that, after being cleaned of branches, would serve perfectly for the purpose. "This one must be about 20 feet long," commented Daniel, helping to drag one of the logs. "Perfect. The longer the lever, the less force we need to use." As they worked, Margaret noticed more signs that someone had been lurking around the property during the night. Fresh footprints in the soft soil near the creek, broken branches in places they hadn't passed through, and even some strange marks on the trees close to the house. "Someone is watching us," she commented to Daniel when the others were playing. "What are we going to do?" "For now, we keep working. But I'll talk to Mr. Walter to see if he can keep an eye on our property at night. Do you think he'll want to help?" "I'm sure he will. Mr. Walter is a good person." At the end of the day, Margaret left the children playing under the supervision of Daniel and Emily and borrowed the old bicycle they had found in the shed to go to town and speak with the neighbor. Mr. Walter was watering the plants in the yard when she arrived. "Mrs. Margaret, how is the adjustment going in the new house?" "Complicated, Mr. Walter. Actually, that's what I came to talk to you about." She told him about the missing tools and the evidence that someone was prowling around the property, but didn't mention anything about the letter or the treasure. "That's not right," said Walter, shaking his head. "Private property is sacred. No one has the right to trespass. Do you think you could stop by there from time to time, just to check if everything is okay?" "Of course, Mrs. Margaret. I can stop by every evening after work. If I see any suspicious movement, I'll shout loudly to scare off the intruders." Margaret thanked the neighbor for his willingness and returned home with a lighter heart. At least they wouldn't be completely unprotected. When she arrived at the property, she found the children excitedly discussing strategies for the next day. They had discovered that by using ropes tied to the levers, everyone could help in the effort to lift the house, even the youngest ones. "It's like a tug-of-war, but in reverse," explained Charlie. "Instead of pulling against each other, we all pull in the same direction." "And I'll give the command," announced Jacob, always wanting to be part of important decisions. Margaret smiled at the scene. Adversity was making the family even more united and creative. "Well thought out, everyone. Tomorrow we'll try to lift the house for the first time." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The 4th morning at the Crooked House dawned cloudy, with the look of rain. Margaret woke up with a strange feeling, as if something important was about to happen. "Today is the day," she announced to the children during the improvised breakfast. "We're going to try to straighten our house." The children reacted with a mix of nervousness and excitement. They had worked so hard in the past few days that the moment of truth seemed unreal. "What if we can't do it?" asked Sarah, always concerned. "Then we try again tomorrow," replied Margaret, "and the next day if necessary. We don't give up until we succeed." They began by positioning the 4 levers at strategic points along the sunken side of the house. Margaret had carefully studied the structure and identified the spots where the pressure would be best distributed. "Remember," she instructed the children, "we'll lift slowly and together. If anyone gets tired, speak up immediately. We don't want anyone to get hurt." The ropes were tied to the ends of the levers, creating a system where each person could contribute their strength. Even 3-year-old Jacob had his own little rope to pull. "Is everyone ready?" asked Margaret, taking her position at the main lever. "Ready!" the children shouted in unison. "Then let's go. 1, 2, 3, pull!" What happened next was both thrilling and frightening. The house actually moved. Not much, but enough to make everyone feel they had a real chance of success. "It's working!" shouted Emily, euphoric. "Keep pulling," ordered Margaret. They maintained the pressure for almost a minute before their strength began to fail. When they released the ropes, the house returned to its original position, but now they knew it was possible to move it. "It worked!" exclaimed Daniel. "We can really lift this house." "We sure can," agreed Margaret, breathless but excited. "The problem is, we don't have the strength to keep it lifted long enough to put the supports back in place." "Then we need more people," observed Emily. "Or a way to keep the levers in place," suggested Charlie. Margaret pondered both suggestions. Asking for help in town was risky. The more people who knew about the house, the greater the chance Harold would find out what they were doing. But Charlie's idea had merit. "Hey, you know what, Charlie, you might have a good idea there. If we can wedge the levers." "How so?" "Put something underneath them to maintain the pressure even after we let go of the ropes." The boy's eyes lit up. "Like wooden blocks." "Exactly. We lift the house with the levers, wedge them quickly, and then we have time to put the supports back in at our own pace." The new strategy required more preparation. They spent the rest of the morning cutting and adjusting pieces of wood that would serve as wedges. They needed various sizes to keep the levers in the correct position. "Timing will be very important," explained Margaret. "One person will have to let go of the rope and place the wedge very quickly before the lever goes back down." "I'll do it," volunteered Daniel. "I'm the fastest." "No, son, you're one of the strongest. I need you on the rope. I'll do it myself." "But Aunt Margaret—" "No arguing, Daniel. I know my strength and my limits." They tested the new plan several times without the house, just practicing the movements. Margaret wanted to make sure everyone knew exactly what to do when the crucial moment came. "Very well," she said, satisfied with the rehearsal. "Now let's do it for real." The second attempt was more organized. Margaret counted to 3, everyone pulled together, and when the house lifted as high as they could manage, she quickly positioned the wedges under the levers. "Now you can let go," she shouted. The children carefully released the ropes, ready to pull again if anything went wrong, but the wedges worked perfectly. The levers stayed in place, keeping the side of the house raised. "We did it!" shouted Emily, jumping for joy. "Not yet," Margaret warned her. "Now comes the hardest part." They only had a few minutes before the makeshift wedges gave way under the weight. Margaret and Daniel scrambled under the raised house, working frantically to put back the support stones that had been removed. "Faster, Aunt Margaret," shouted Emily, seeing one of the wedges starting to crack. "Almost done," Margaret replied, adjusting the last stone. "It's ready," announced Daniel. "Get out from under there," ordered Emily. Margaret and Daniel crawled out of the confined space seconds before one of the wedges completely split. The house settled, but now it was resting on the stones they had put back. Everyone stayed quiet for a few moments watching the house. The tilt had decreased significantly. It wasn't completely straight, but the difference was visible and encouraging. "Look at that," said Timmy, admiration in his voice. "It works," exclaimed Jacob, clapping his hands. Margaret sat on the ground, exhausted but triumphant. They had proven it was possible. With patience and hard work, they would be able to straighten the house completely. "Well done, family," she said, smiling at the happy faces around her. "We still have a lot of work ahead, but we've taken the first important step." "When are we doing the rest?" asked Charlie eagerly. "Tomorrow. We've done enough today. Let's rest and plan the next steps." But the rest didn't last long. Around midday, they heard the sound of an engine approaching on the dirt road. Margaret got up, worried, and went to the front of the property to see who was arriving. It was Harold Patterson driving his red pickup truck with an unfriendly expression on his face. "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret," he said, getting out of the vehicle uninvited. "Good morning, Mr. Harold. What brings you here?" "I came to see how you're adapting to the new house." Margaret noticed his eyes immediately went to the side of the house, observing that the lean had decreased. His expression grew even darker. I see you've been tampering with the structure. We're trying to make the house more livable. Mrs. Margaret, I need to warn you about something important. This house has serious structural problems. Messing with the support can be very dangerous, especially with children around. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Harold, but we're taking all necessary precautions. It's not just concern, Mrs. Margaret. It's my responsibility. If there's an accident here, I'll be blamed for handing over a dangerous property. Margaret felt a chill down her spine. Was he trying to discourage her or threaten her? Are you suggesting we should leave? I'm suggesting you accept the offer I'm going to make. I'll buy the property back for $5,000. That's more than a house in this condition is worth. The house isn't for sale, Mr. Harold. $6,000. It's not for sale at any price. Harold's face turned red with anger, but he tried to maintain his composure. Mrs. Margaret, you're being reckless. These children depend on you to make smart decisions. And that's exactly why I won't accept your offer. Harold stood still for a few moments, clearly trying to think of another approach. Very well, but I want to make it clear that I take no responsibility for any accidents that might happen, and I strongly recommend you consult an engineer before continuing to tamper with the structure. Thank you for the suggestion. Harold took another look at the partially straightened house and returned to his pickup truck, but before leaving he made one last attempt. $8,000, Mrs. Margaret, that's my final offer. And my final answer is no. He left in a cloud of dust, leaving Margaret with a bad feeling. His insistence confirmed her suspicions. Harold knew about the treasure and was desperate to get the property back. The children approached, having watched the whole conversation from a distance. He seemed angry, commented Sarah. He was, dear. But don't worry, this house is ours now and we're staying here. And why did he want to buy it back if the house is as bad as he said? Asked Emily, always logical. Because he wasn't being honest about his reasons, replied Margaret. Daniel approached her and whispered, He knows about the treasure, doesn't he? Margaret nodded discreetly. But that just gives us more reason to work faster. They spent the rest of the day planning the next step. The morning's experience had shown that the method worked, but they would need to repeat the process several times to completely straighten the house. Let's break it down into stages, explained Margaret. Each day we lift it a little more until we get everything level. How long will it take? Asked Timmy. If we're lucky and there are no more interruptions, maybe a week. What if Harold comes back to bother us? We'll deal with that when it happens. But Margaret knew Harold wouldn't give up easily. The offer of $8,000 for a property he had sold to settle a $3,000 debt made it clear there was much more at stake than appeared. That night, she made a decision. She couldn't risk leaving the children unprotected on the property. She needed help and knew only one person in the area she could completely trust. The next morning, she sent Daniel to town with a message for Mr. Walter, asking him to come talk urgently. The neighbor arrived mid-morning, worried by the urgent tone of the message. Did something happen, Mrs. Margaret? Mr. Walter, I need to ask a very big favor, but first, I have to tell you a story. And she told him everything. About the letter, about the treasure, about her suspicions regarding Harold, and about her fear that he might try something more drastic to reclaim the property. Walter listened to everything in silence, occasionally shaking his head. Mrs. Margaret, I always knew Harold was a man without character, but what you're telling me is very serious. That's why I need help. Not to find the treasure, but to protect the children while we work. You can count on me. I'll stay here during the day while you're working, and I can bring some trusted friends to help with security. Margaret felt enormous relief. Having Walter as an ally completely changed the situation. But there's one condition, he continued. When you find the money, I want you to keep a portion of it in a safe place far from here. Men like Harold are capable of anything when money is involved. You're right. We'll be very careful. With security assured, the work of straightening the house proceeded more quickly. Walter brought proper tools and some construction knowledge that significantly sped up the process. You were doing impressive work, he commented, observing the lever system they had created. But with the right tools we can do much better. On the third day of intensive work, with Walter overseeing security, the house was finally completely level. Margaret couldn't believe it when she stepped on the house floor and felt no slope. We did it, she murmured. with tears in her eyes. "We did it!" shouted the children, running from one side to the other of the now straight house. "And now," asked Emily, "how are we going to find the treasure?" Margaret took the letter and reread it carefully. It says here that the money is buried in a safe location on the property, but it doesn't give more details. "There must be more clues somewhere," suggested Daniel. They spent the rest of the day searching for anything that might indicate the location of the money. They scoured every corner of the house, explored the shed, followed the stream, but found nothing. "Maybe the clue is in the house itself," suggested Walter. "Now that it's straight, you might see things you couldn't before." It was a good suggestion. With the house leveled, the interior looked completely different. Margaret began examining the floorboards, looking for any irregularity. It was Charlie who made the discovery. "Aunt Margaret, this floorboard here looks strange." Margaret bent down to examine the spot the boy indicated. One of the floorboards seemed to have been removed and recently replaced. The edges didn't fit perfectly with the neighboring boards. "Walter, do you have a small pry bar?" Carefully, they lifted the loose floorboard. Underneath was a small hole in which another metal box, similar to the first one they had found, was buried. "Another letter!" exclaimed Emily. This second letter was more detailed. "If you've made it this far, it means you managed to straighten my house. Congratulations. This shows you are a determined person and deserve what I've hidden. The money is buried under the largest tree on the property, 3 steps north of the spring that flows at its base. Dig 2 meters deep, and you will find a large cookie tin. Inside it are my savings. But be careful, there are people in the area who know about this money and may try to harm you. Use it wisely and keep it a secret for as long as you can. May this wealth bring happiness to you and your family." "Walter." "A spring!" exclaimed Margaret. "We haven't seen any spring on the property." "I saw one," shouted Jacob, jumping. "There's water coming out of the ground near the big tree." The children ran out of the house, followed by Margaret and Walter. Jacob led them to a huge tree at the back of the property, where there was indeed a small spring bubbling up from the earth. "How did we not notice this before?" asked Emily. "We were focused on the house," replied Margaret. "We didn't properly explore the rest of the land." Walter bent down and examined the spring. "This water is very clean. It's a natural spring indeed." 3 steps to the north, remembered Daniel, picking up the letter. They counted 3 medium-sized steps in the northern direction and marked the spot. "It's here," said Margaret, feeling her heart race. "Shall we dig?" asked Charlie, barely able to contain his excitement. "Let's, but carefully. 2 meters is quite deep." They started digging in the late afternoon, working in shifts. The soil was soft and easy to dig, but 2 meters was indeed a considerable depth. When the hole reached chest level for Margaret, Walter's shovel hit something metallic. "We found it." Carefully, they excavated around the object until they could remove it completely. It was a large cookie tin, exactly as Walter had described. Margaret opened the tin with trembling hands. Inside, carefully wrapped in plastic bags, were stacks of money bills. "My God," murmured Walter. "That's really a lot of money." Margaret counted the bills carefully. It was exactly $15,000, as promised in the first letter. The children fell silent, impressed by the amount of money. For them, who had spent years dealing with financial difficulties, that sum seemed like an impossible fortune. "What are we going to do now, Aunt Margaret?" asked Emily. Margaret looked at the expectant faces around her and felt an enormous responsibility. That money wasn't just a solution to their immediate problems. It was the opportunity to give the children the future they deserved. "First, we're going to put this in a very safe place," she replied. "Then, we're going to carefully plan how to use this gift that Mr. Walter left us." "What about Harold?" asked Daniel. "Harold will never find out. This will be our secret until we can use it in the best way possible." Walter agreed with Margaret's prudence. "Mrs. Margaret is right. The fewer people who know, the better. I can help you open an account at a bank in another town where no one will suspect anything." "Thank you, Walter. I don't know what we would do without your help." That's what neighbors do for each other. They put the soil back in the hole and disguised any signs that they had dug there. The money was carefully divided and hidden in several different places, in case someone discovered any of the hiding spots. That night, Margaret gathered all the children for a serious talk. I want everyone to understand the importance of not telling anyone about what we found today. Not with friends, not with neighbors, not with anyone in town. It's our family secret. For how long? Asked Timmy. Until I decide it's safe. It could be a few months, it could be years. But in the meantime, we'll be able to renovate our house, buy furniture, and even think about your schooling. Will we be able to study? Asked Emily, her eyes shining. Yes, you will, dear. You will all be able to study and become whatever you want to be. The children celebrated quietly, understanding they needed to keep their joy contained to avoid drawing attention. But first, continued Margaret, we need to finish renovating our house. Now we have the resources to do everything properly. Fix the roof, replace the old boards, make new furniture. And paint, asked Jacob, who loved colors. And paint too, my love. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The following weeks were filled with intense work, but also great joy. With the necessary resources, Margaret was able to hire some helpers from town to speed up the house renovation, always careful not to arouse suspicion about the money's origin. I inherited from a distant uncle, she explained when someone asked about her new possessions. Walter helped her craft a convincing story and document everything to appear legitimate. They even discovered some old documents proving the existence of this supposed uncle. The house was completely transformed. The roof was redone with new shingles, the walls got fresh boards, the floor was leveled and varnished. Inside, Margaret had custom furniture made so each child could have their own space. We've never had such a beautiful house, commented Sarah, admiring her new room. And it's really ours, not borrowed, added Hannah. Most importantly, however, were the investments in the children's education. Margaret enrolled them all in the region's best school and bought uniforms, school supplies, and even extra books for studying at home. Aunt Margaret, thank you for everything, said Emily, hugging Margaret on the first day of school. No need to thank me, dear. You deserve much more than this. But not everything was easy. Harold didn't give up trying to reclaim the property. His attempts grew increasingly creative and persistent. First, he claimed there were issues with the sale documentation. Mrs. Margaret, I discovered an error in the property registration. I need you to sign some papers to fix the situation. Margaret, however, had learned to be cautious. With Walter's help, she consulted a lawyer in the capital who examined all the documents and confirmed everything was correct. There's no error, Mr. Harold. The property is rightfully mine. Next, he tried social pressure, spreading rumors through town. That woman is putting the children at risk, living in a house that could collapse any moment, he told anyone who would listen. But when people visited the property and saw the fully renovated house, they realized the rumors made no sense. Harold even tried bribing some workers Margaret had hired, offering money for them to sabotage the renovation or find excuses to prolong the work. A man offered me $50 to spill paint on your new house, one painter told Margaret. Said you'd stolen the property from him. I hope you didn't accept. Of course not, Mrs. Margaret. You're a respectable person, and that Harold is known in town for his tricks. Margaret learned Harold had made similar attempts with other workers, all of whom refused his offers. This reassured her about choosing the right people to help. The situation peaked when Harold showed up at the property with a man claiming to be a court officer. Mrs. Margaret, this gentleman has a summons for you. Margaret examined the document carefully. It was a supposed court order for her to appear before a judge to clarify property ownership issues. May I see your identification? She asked the supposed officer. The man hesitated and showed a badge that looked fake even to Margaret, who had no experience with official documents. This badge doesn't seem real to me, she said. Of course it's real, protested Harold. You're trying to disrespect a court order. If it's a legitimate court order, you won't mind me calling the county courthouse to confirm. Margaret went inside and phoned the courthouse. After a few minutes, she returned with a serious expression. The courthouse says there's no case involving this property, and they didn't send any officer here today. Harold's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. There must have been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding here is you trying to deceive me with fake documents. That's a crime, Mr. Harold. The supposed bailiff hurried away, leaving Harold alone to face the situation. Mrs. Margaret, I didn't know the document was fake. This man came to me saying he had a summons to deliver. Don't lie to me, Harold. We all know you're behind these attempts to intimidate me. You can't prove anything. I don't need to prove it. I just need you to stop bothering me. Otherwise, I'll have to contact the real authorities. Harold left the property that day angrier than ever, but Margaret could tell he was getting desperate too. His attempts were becoming cruder and more obvious, a sign that he was losing patience. He won't give up, commented Walter, who had witnessed the whole scene. I know, but we won't be intimidated either. Maybe it's time to take more decisive action. Like what? Let's investigate this man, find out exactly what he knows and how he found out about the treasure. Walter's suggestion made sense. If they could better understand Harold's motivations, they could protect themselves more effectively. How do we do that? I have some friends in town who know his story. We might find out something interesting. The following week, Walter returned with surprising information. Mrs. Margaret, Harold's story is more complicated than we thought. What did you find out? He's not just a greedy businessman. For years he's been buying properties from people in financial trouble for very low prices, then reselling them for much higher. That's not illegal? No, but the method he uses is questionable. My friends told me he often sabotages the properties before offering to buy them, to force the owners to sell cheap. Margaret was shocked but not surprised. So he really did sabotage our house. More than that, I found out he knew Mr. Walter personally. They were neighbors for many years. That means that he probably knew about the hidden money from the start. He might have even tried to convince Walter to reveal the location before he passed away. That's why he kept the property when Walter was gone. Exactly. But since he couldn't find the treasure, he decided to use your husband's debt as an excuse to transfer the property to you, hoping we'd do the work of fixing up the house and finding the money for him. And then he'd find a way to take the property back, along with the treasure. Margaret fell silent, processing all the information. The situation was even more serious than she had imagined. So, he'll never give up. Not as long as he thinks there's money buried here. So now, what do we do? Walter thought for a few moments before answering. We have two options. Either confront him with what we know, or set a trap. What kind of trap? Make him believe the treasure doesn't exist, or that it's already been found and taken by someone else. The idea was intriguing. If they could convince Harold that there was nothing of value left on the property, maybe he would finally leave them alone. How would we do that? We stage a fake discovery. We pretend we found something buried, but it turns out to be just a disappointment. Would it be dangerous? Any confrontation with men like Harold is dangerous, but it might be our best chance to get rid of him for good. Margaret thought about the proposal for several days. On one hand, she wanted to protect the children from any risk. On the other, she knew that living under Harold's constant threat wasn't a good option either. Let's try it, she finally decided, but very carefully and with planning. Great. I'll work out a detailed plan. Walter's plan was clever. They would stage an excavation on the property, in a different spot from where they had actually found the money. They would leave evidence that they were searching for something and then fake a disappointing discovery. We'll do it when we know Harold is nearby watching, Walter explained. How can we be sure he's watching? Lately, I've noticed he's been passing by the road in front of the property more often than usual. He's keeping an eye on you. What if he decides to approach during the act? Even better. That way he'll see up close that there's nothing of value here. They spent a week preparing the trap. They chose a spot near the shed, far from the real location of the treasure, and started digging during the times they knew Harold usually passed by the road. Remember, Margaret instructed the children, we're looking for a buried can that might contain money. You can show excitement and curiosity, but when we don't find anything, I want you to show real disappointment. The children, thinking the situation was a big adventure, played their parts with convincing enthusiasm. On the third day of the fake excavation, Harold showed up at the property. Good afternoon, Mrs. Margaret. I saw you've been digging around here. Looking for something? Margaret pretended to be embarrassed. Good morning, Mr. Harold. It's just, we found an old letter that mentioned something buried on the land. Harold's eyes lit up immediately. What kind of letter? A letter from the previous owner. It said he had buried a can with his valuables somewhere on the property. And did you find anything? Margaret sighed theatrically. Unfortunately, no. We dug all over, but only found empty cans and old tools. Can I see the letter? Margaret had anticipated that question. They had created a fake letter, deliberately vague and lacking specific details. Harold read the document eagerly, but his expression gradually shifted from hope to frustration. This letter doesn't say exactly where to look. That's what we realized. We dug in several different spots, but nothing. And you've given up? Not completely, but we're starting to think there might be nothing buried here. Harold watched the dug-up area for a few minutes, clearly trying to decide if he should do his own digging. If you find anything, I hope you'll let me know, he said finally. As someone who knows the property's history, I'm interested in any historical finds. Of course, Mr. Harold. After he left, Walter emerged from behind the shed, where he had hidden to watch the whole conversation. It worked, he whispered. I could tell from his expression that he bought the story. Are you sure? Pretty sure. But let's wait and see if he bothers you again. Over the following weeks, Harold really seemed to lose interest in the property. His visits became rare, and when he did show up, it was just for casual chats without mentioning buying or selling. I think we did it, Margaret remarked to Walter. He seems to have given up. I hope so. But let's remain vigilant for a few more months. Life on the property had finally started to normalize. The children had adjusted well to their new school, the house was completely renovated and comfortable, and Margaret even began thinking about future projects. Aunt Margaret, can I learn violin? Asked Emily one day. Of course, dear. I'll look for a teacher in town. And can I take woodworking lessons? Asked Daniel. You can too. Let's see what we can arrange. The transformation in the children's lives was visible. They were more confident, happier, and began dreaming of futures that once seemed impossible. When I grow up, I'll be a teacher, declared Sarah. I'll be a doctor, said Hannah. I'll be a carpenter, announced Daniel. And I'll be a clown, shouted Jacob, making everyone laugh. Margaret watched them with tears of joy in her eyes. Walter Henderson's treasure had given them much more than money. It had given them hope and possibilities. But most importantly, they had achieved all this by working together, supporting each other, and never giving up even when the situation seemed impossible. Do you know what the real treasure is? She asked the children one evening when they were all gathered in the new living room. The money, ventured Charlie. No, my dear. The real treasure is our family. The money helped, but it was your love and unity that truly transformed our life. And the crooked house, added Jacob. If it weren't crooked, we would never have found the money. Everyone laughed at the boy's observation, but Margaret realized there was a simple wisdom in his words. Sometimes, the situations that seem worst are exactly what we need to discover the best things in life. A few months later, Margaret received an unexpected visit. It was an elderly, well-dressed man who introduced himself as a lawyer. Mrs. Margaret, my name is Dr. Henry Chambers. I'm the lawyer for the Henderson family. Margaret felt her heart race. Were there legal problems with the money they found? How can I help you? I heard you're living in the former property of Mr. Walter Henderson. Yes, I bought the property to settle a debt. I came here because the family is trying to locate some personal belongings of Mr. Walter Henderson. Documents, photographs, perhaps some letters. Margaret relaxed a bit. It didn't seem to be about the money. We found some things during the house renovation. I can show them to you. I would be very grateful. Margaret brought a box where she had stored some personal items they found in the house. Old photographs, some personal letters, and some unimportant documents. The lawyer examined the items fondly. These photographs are very important to the family. They would be the only remaining memories of Mr. Walter Henderson. You can take everything, said Margaret. We have no right to these family memories. You're very kind, but actually I also came here to make a proposal. Margaret tensed up again. What kind of proposal? The family would like to make a donation to you. as a way of thanking you for taking such good care of the property that meant so much to Mr. Walter Henderson." "That's not necessary, and I insist. Walter was a very special person, and he would be happy to know his property is in the hands of a family that values it." The lawyer took an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Margaret. "It's just a small contribution for the children's expenses." Margaret opened the envelope and found $5,000 in bills. "Doctor, this is very generous, but there's no discussion. It's the least we can do. Besides, I have one more thing for you." He took out another envelope, this one containing documents. These are the definitive property deeds for the land. Walter had left instructions that if someone showed genuine care for the property, they should receive the final deed without any cost. Margaret couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you saying that the property is yours with full rights, no debts, no pending issues, no possibility of dispute?" Margaret sat down, feeling her legs go weak. Now Harold could never try to take her property away. "How can I thank you?" "By taking good care of this land and these children." That's what Mr. Walter wanted. After the lawyer left, Margaret gathered the family to share the news. "Does this mean we never have to leave here?" asked Emily. "Never again, dear. This is our home forever." The children celebrated, but Margaret felt an even greater responsibility. Walter had trusted her not just with his money, but with his home and his memory. That night, she went out to look at the stars and reflect on everything that had happened. In less than a year, they had gone from the brink of despair to a stability she never imagined possible. The Crooked House had transformed into a perfect home. The orphaned children had become a close-knit family, and she, a widow without prospects, had become the guardian of a legacy of kindness and hope. "Thank you, Walter," she whispered to the night wind. "We will honor your trust." And so they did. In the following years, the property became not just a home for Margaret and the children, but also a landmark in the community. Margaret used some of the money to create a small community center where local children could come to study and play. Daniel truly became a carpenter and helped build new rooms as the family grew. Emily fulfilled her dream of becoming a teacher and gave free lessons to underprivileged children in the area. The others also pursued their dreams, each contributing in their own way to the community that had welcomed them. And Harold? He never bothered the family again. Eventually, Margaret learned that he had left the area after some of his dishonest schemes were publicly exposed. The house that was once crooked became a symbol that with determination, unity, and a little luck, it's possible to straighten out any situation, no matter how impossible it may seem. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of overcoming and family unity? Do you believe Margaret made the right decisions in accepting the Crooked House and fighting to turn it into a home? Leave your opinion in the comments and tell us where you're listening from. If you have any similar experiences of overcoming to share, we'd love to read them in the comments. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one.